HBO's new series, The Sympathizer, opens with a statement. All wars are fought twice. The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. This sets the stage for the main character's journey through the next 7 episodes and sets the tone for his experience. What drew me to this book the first time I read it was something that doesn't necessarily translate to TV. As we learn early, the captain, who's called that because he's never referred to by his real name, straddles 2 worlds without belonging in either. As the name would suggest, that involves conflicting sympathies, which become apparent as he introduces himself while he rewrites a forced confession in a small cell. He writes that he's a spy, a sleeper, a spook, a man of 2 faces, cursed to see every issue from both sides. As the episode unfolds, we'll learn that he was a communist agent working for the South Vietnamese as an assistant to a general at the end of the war. It goes deeper than that. Not only is he actively playing both sides of opposing political forces, he's an illegitimate son of a Frenchman, who may not have given him his name, but did pass on some light eyes that kind of mark him as an outsider. That status is what made his internal dialogue the main selling point of the story when I first read it. It was the reason I was excited to hear there was a TV show adaptation in the works, because you know the captain. That's my guy. I like that guy. But then when I thought about it a little more, I started to worry, because most of what's likable about him is revealed through his thoughts. Can they do that on TV? That was the big question. And if the first episode, which is titled Death Wish after the Charles Bronson movie, is a good example, then the answer is yes. Through a variety of tricks like a fun rewind effect and then just flat out using narration, they managed to keep the spirit intact while making a slick looking adaptation for it to exist in. As to what actually happens in the show's first episode, it opens with a message delivered through a film strip that hints at an identity crisis by saying, in America it's called the Vietnam War, in Vietnam it's called the American War. That's followed by the statement I mentioned at the beginning about all wars being fought twice. And that part comes from a nonfiction book called Nothing Ever Dies, written by the Sympathizer's author, Viet Thanh Nguyen. Then we meet the captain writing his confession in his cell and can tell from his captor's uniforms that they were on the winning side of the conflict. We go back to 4 months before Saigon fell, to January 1975, and see him meet with a colorful CIA operative named Claude. He thinks he's there to see Death Wish, which is where the episode gets its name, but notices that something's off. Inside, there's an interrogation underway. A beat-up Northern operative is being questioned about a list of agents they found in her possession. They want to know who gave her the list, which we'll find out later was the captain himself, which leads to him being noticeably uncomfortable, but she doesn't break under the pressure and give up his name. As we go back to see how the events that led to them being there played out, the reality of how dangerous the game he's playing comes into focus. Man, one of his best friends and his handler, sent him to pick up the list and drop it in a mailbox. At his job working for the general, they find out about the drop from a wiretap, which means he has to respond. He sends agents in to catch the spy, then gets word to Man that their agent will be caught through some inelegant phone code. As that's playing out, we meet his other best friend, Bon, and his wife and their newborn child. Bon's father was killed by the Viet Cong, so he's in the dark about their covert activity since they know they'll never win him over to the people's cause. Throughout this sequence, we also get the sense that Robert Downey Jr. is bringing everything he has to his character. The performance is borderline over the top, but I think this is carefully calculated to play into something that won't become apparent until later. Plus, it's fun to watch. And if we're talking about being careful, executive producer and co-showrunner Park Chan-wook directs this episode and threads the needle between the heavy subject matter and the dark humor that coexists in the book. It's no simple feat, and it appears he's up for the challenge. When I went back to watch this the second time to take notes, I was surprised at how the direction had just pulled me through some of this stuff. Things that look a lot more complicated when you write them down. He takes you on a ride that doesn't miss any of the emotional beats, and you just sort of swing between the highs and lows. The captain and his found family are navigating life and death matters, and then you have Claude, the cartoon character, rambling on while the northern spy is passing the film into a bucket with an audience of agents watching. A couple of months later, Claude visits the general's home, which is also where the captain stays, and finds out that things are getting to the point where the general's ready to leave for the US. He stresses he's not fleeing, but rather retreating temporarily, and is disappointed to learn he'll only be able to arrange passage for 92 people. It sounds like a lot, but he has an extended family of 58, and then there's his wife's family to think about, not to mention the men who are under his direct command. Anyone left behind would be lucky if they only faced re-education after working with the Americans. So when the general tells the captain to make a list of who they'll take with them, he's tasked with making some life and death decisions. Decisions the general doesn't want to make. But as a spy, the captain's happy to do it because he's planning on staying behind and seeing them get a harsh trial in a revolutionary court. He's able to secure spots for Bond and his family, shares a toast with the general to a future that feels uncertain, and then breaks the news to the staff on whether they made the cut or not. If there's a single scene that sums up the show's ability to navigate its shifting tones, it has to be when one of the chosen few tries to demand 5 more seats, ending his plea by threatening suicide. The captain nonchalantly provides him with a handgun and ammo and tells him he'll give him some privacy before leaving his office. He does consider the gun for a minute, but then opts to empty the candy jar on the desk into his hat before going to tell the bad news to the family members he'll have to leave behind. It's a lot of things. And to go back to things that hooked me on the book, the way the story is structured and the way the captain doesn't fit neatly on either side allows it to be a lot of things. There's a lot packed in there that deals with history and culture and the war itself. It can be a spy thriller, an immigrant story, political satire, and a dark comedy. Add in an unreliable narrator, which we see pop up at different times during the pilot episode, and things can get, and perhaps more importantly, stay interesting. Before they leave, the Blood Brothers get together one last time for beers. It's one of those moments that can feel like the old times, while everyone there processes that they'll never go back to how they were before. It's an ending of sorts, and when a woman starts singing a familiar anti-war song, there are tears all around. A few soldiers in the crowd don't appreciate what they consider a commie song, and after they insult the captain for being biracial, Bond starts fighting with them and doesn't look terribly put out by the experience. This gives the communist members of the Blood Brothers a chance to talk shop, and Mann gives the captain some bad news. Not only will the general be allowed to escape to America, where he'll surely coordinate counter-revolutionary action, but they're going to need someone there to watch him and report back. When the captain tries to refuse, Mann tells him he can do more for the revolution there, and when pressed as to why, he says because he knows he wants to go. The letters he sent home from college were like fan letters, and whether he wants to believe it or not, his friend knows he loves America. The captain argues he was fascinated and repulsed, and Mann effectively ends the conversation by pointing out that that's what it means to love America. In an effort to tone down the harshness, he adds that home is overrated. From there, we jump ahead to one day before the fall of Saigon. The general's daughter, Lan, drags her feet, but eventually they get the bus loaded. The general leads them through the city on his motorcycle before they reach the airfield where a chaotic crowd is fighting to get in. Claude arrives to say his goodbyes and brings up the song Runaway, which he attributes to Dion, giving the captain the chance to correct him, saying it was Del Shannon. This is one of several references to American music throughout the episode, and feels connected to what Mann said about the captain's feelings about his time there. The episode ends with a harrowing sequence. Bombs are dropping while they're being driven to their flight, and this eventually causes the bus to flip over. All the key players survive the crash, but as they're running to board the plane, a helicopter crashes to the ground and the debris kills Bond's wife and child. The captain runs to his friend, and while the general and the soldiers on the plane are screaming for him to board, it cuts back to him in his cell where we first met him at the beginning of the episode. He looks emotional, thinking about the past, and then he hears the song Runaway playing outside, and the episode ends with him singing along. So yeah, I thought this was a really solid start. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there were a few things I thought might be a problem, and they just didn't turn out to be problems at all. I'm a sucker for a period piece and have some personal connections to Vietnam, but objectively this looked great from the very first frame. The transition from the spy calling them all traitors and saying that they'll all be on their knees begging for a coward's flight out into the jump ahead with the explosions destroying the theater was when it really started to settle in. Here's hoping they can keep it up, and I think that is a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.